The arrow took Ivy Hawthorne through the shoulder just as she crested the ridge. Pain exploded like fire in her veins, white-hot and blinding. She staggered, the mule's reins slipping from her numb fingers as the beast bolted into the underbrush with a panicked bray. Ivy dropped to one knee in the mud, clutching the shaft protruding from her cloak, feathered fletching black as midnight, tipped with obsidian that glistened wetly red. Not an accident, not a hunter's stray shot. Someone had aimed. She tore the arrow free with gritted teeth, the wet rip of flesh making her vision swim. Blood soaked her sleeve instantly, hot and sticky, dripping onto the fern-choked earth. She pressed her palm hard against the wound, staggering forward through the mist that clung to the ancient cedars like funeral shrouds. The forest seemed to lean in, branches whispering secrets in a language she could almost understand. Danger, run, hide. She had come here for refuge, not death. Fleeing England after the witchfinders burned her mother's cottage and branded Ivy herself with the mark of heresy for her knowledge of herbs and stars. The new world promised oblivion, a place where no one knew her name. She had bartered passage on a leaking carrack, then traded her last silver shillings to a coastal trader for directions to this forgotten valley, and the solitary cabin said to stand empty since its builder vanished years ago. The price, 30 silver pieces, the trader had smirked as he counted them into her palm. Odd sum, lass, some say the land demands it, a debt unpaid from the first who trespassed here. Ivy had ignored the superstition. Silver was silver, she needed shelter, not stories. Now blood trailing behind her like a crimson breadcrumb path, she spotted the cabin through a break in the trees, low, dark logs half swallowed by moss and vine, chimney cold, door hanging crooked on leather hinges. No smoke, no light, but the ground around it was churned, as if something large had paced the clearing recently, deep paw prints mingled with boot marks, claw gouges scoring the earth. She stumbled onto the porch, shoulders screaming with every step, and shoved the door open with her good arm. Inside, shadows swallowed her. The air was thick, pine resin, old smoke, and something primal like wet fur and iron. A stone hearth stood cold. Shelves held jars of dried roots and leaves she recognized from forbidden grimoires. On the lintel above the door, crude carvings, wolves with bared fangs, moons bleeding into crowns of thorns. No time to marvel. She needed to staunch the bleeding before she fainted. She tore a strip from her petticoat with shaking hands, binding the wound as tightly as she could. The pain sharpened her senses, every creak of the cabin settling, every distant snap of a twig outside. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl from deeper within the structure. Her knife was in her boot, small but sharp. She drew it, backing toward the wall. The growl came again, closer, ragged, pained, not outside, inside. A narrow passage led to the rear. At its end, a trapdoor in the floorboards stood ajar, as if recently forced. Ivy approached on silent feet, heart hammering. She nudged the trapdoor wider with her boot and peered down. Candle stubs littered the earthen floor below, their wax pooled like blood. In the dim light, a man, no, something more, lay chained to the far wall with thick iron links. He was massive, shoulders broad enough to block the narrow space, dark hair falling in sweat-matted strands across a face carved from fury and pain. His chest heaved with labored breaths, deep gashes raked his torso, black blood oozing from wounds that refused to close. Silver chains encircled his wrists and throat, the metal smoking faintly where it touched skin, raising blisters that hissed like hot iron on flesh. He lifted his head slowly, eyes the color of molten gold locked onto hers, not human eyes, predator eyes, pupils slit narrow, glowing with an inner fire that made the candle flames pale. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that stare. Hunger, rage, recognition. You, he rasped, voice like gravel dragged over stone, thick with an accent older than the trees outside. The silver, it calls you. Ivy's knife hand trembled, but she didn't lower it. Who are you? What are you? He laughed, a short, bitter sound that ended in a cough of blood. Ronan, once king of the shadowed packs, now prey. His gaze dropped to her blood-soaked sleeve. You're wounded, fresh. They hunted you too. Them, Ivy's mind raced. Whispers of native spirit tales, European werewolf legends smuggled across the sea, the traders warning about debts. Ronan's head snapped up as a chorus of howls erupted outside, close, circling, hungry. The cabin seemed to shudder. My betrayers, he growled. They scented the silver on you, 30 pieces, enough to bind a king or summon his doom. The chains rattled as he strained against them, muscles cording, veins standing out like cords. One link cracked, but the silver held, burning deeper into his flesh. He snarled in frustration, eyes flashing back to her. Free me, woman, or we both die here tonight. Ivy's pulse thundered in her ears. Free a monster, or leave him to rot while hunters closed in. Another howl, louder, nearer. Something heavy crashed through the underbrush outside. She met his gaze again. Those golden eyes held no plea, only raw command, and something darker, a promise of protection, of vengeance, of something that burned hotter than the pain in her shoulder. The trapdoor creaked as she stepped onto the first rung of the ladder down. What if I refuse? She asked, voice steady despite the fear clawing her throat. Ronan's lips curved in a feral smile, fangs glinting. Then the night takes us both. But know this, Ivy Hawthorne, your blood already sings to mine. The bargain is struck. She froze on the ladder. How did he know her name? The howls rose to a deafening crescendo. Claws scraped wood outside the cabin walls. Ivy descended another step, knife still raised. The choice was no longer hers. The debt had come to collect. Ivy's boot hit the earthen floor of the cellar with a soft thud that echoed like a heartbeat in the confined space. The candle in her hand sputtered, throwing wild shadows across the rough walls and the chained figure before her. Ronan hadn't moved, but his golden eyes tracked her every step, predatory, patient, burning with an intensity that made the air feel thinner, hotter. The howls outside swelled again, closer now, a savage chorus that vibrated through the logs overhead. Claws scraped against the cabin's outer walls, slow, deliberate testing. Whatever hunted them was no ordinary pack. These were the betrayers Ronan had named, and they had followed the scent of silver like bloodhounds on a fresh trail. Ivy's shoulder throbbed in time with her pulse, blood still seeping through the hasty bandage. She ignored it, survival first, questions later. She crouched a safe distance from him, knife still gripped tight. You know my name, she said, voice low but steady. How? Ronan's lips peeled back in a grimace that might have been a smile. The silver whispers it, 30 pieces, carried by one who flees her own chains. The land hungers for balance. It chose you the moment you crossed the ridge. His voice was rough, strained, but there was power beneath it, like thunder trapped in a storm cloud. Ivy glanced at the silver chains, binding his wrists to iron rings driven deep into the stone. The metal was etched with strange runes that glowed faintly when his skin touched them, sizzling as if alive. Blisters covered his forearms where the links had bitten deepest. These chains, they burn you. Silver laced with old venom, he growled. A trap forged by my own blood. My brother thought to end me quietly. Instead, he left me here to rot while the pack fractures. His eyes flicked to her wound. They shot you to draw me out. Your blood woke the binding. Now they come to finish us both. Another crash against the cabin, wood splintering somewhere above. Dust sifted from the ceiling beams. Ivy's mind raced. Leave him chained and the hunters would tear through the cabin, find her hiding, finish what the arrow started. Free him and she unleashed. What? A monster? A man? Something in between. She rose, stepping closer. The heat radiating from him was unnatural, like standing near an open forge. His scent hit her, pine smoke, wild musk, coppery blood, primal, intoxicating in a way that made her skin prickle. Tell me why I should trust you, she demanded. Ronan's gaze never wavered. Because if you die tonight, the debt remains unpaid. The silver you brought will curse this land forever. Every soul who treads here will bleed as we do. But if you free me, his voice dropped to a rumble that vibrated in her chest. I swear on the blood of my line, no harm will come to you by my hand, and I will hunt those who marked you. A vow, in this forsaken place, words carried weight heavier than iron. Ivy exhaled sharply. She sheathed her knife, foolish perhaps but necessary. She needed both hands. Kneeling beside him, she examined the nearest chain. The links were thick, but the runes seemed weakest where his blood had dripped onto them, eating away at the metal like acid. She drew the small hammer and chisel from her satchel, tools she'd carried for carving her own path in this new world. "This will hurt," she warned. Ronan's laugh was dark, pained. "Pain is an old friend." She struck, the chisel bit into the link with a ringing clang. Sparks flew, unnatural blue ones that hissed and died on the dirt floor. Ronan tensed, a low growl rumbling from his throat as the silver burned deeper into his flesh. But he didn't flinch, didn't beg. Again and again, each blow echoed like a bell tolling doom. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles corded, veins bulging. The chain began to give, metal groaning, runes flickering erratically. With a final, desperate swing, the link snapped. The chain fell away from one wrist in a shower of smoking fragments. Ronan's arm shot forward, too fast to track. His hand closed around her uninjured wrist, not in restraint, but in anchor. The contact was electric. Heat surged through her, raw, wild power that raced up her arm, into her chest, down her spine. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. She saw flashes, moonlit forests, packs running under blood-red skis, a crown of antlers and thorns placed on his head, betrayal in the form of a silver blade across his back. And somehow her, standing beside him, blood on her hands, silver in her veins. Then it was gone. She gasped, yanking back, but his grip gentled, released. His eyes had softened, the gold deepening to something almost human. "The bond," he murmured, voice hoarse, "it wakes." Ivy stared at her wrist. No mark, but the skin tingled where he'd touched her. Her shoulder wound, the bleeding had slowed. The pain dulled to a distant ache. Above them, the cabin door crashed inward. Howls turned to snarls, multiple shapes pouring through the opening, eyes glowing red in the darkness. Ronan rose slowly, chains clanking as he tore at the remaining bindings with his freed hand. Muscles rippled under torn skin, bones cracked as he straightened to his full height, towering, lethal. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice a low command that brooked no argument. Ivy snatched her knife again, heart pounding with a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The first wolf thing lunged through the trapdoor, half man, half beast, fur matted with blood, jaws dripping. Ronan met it midair. A roar tore from his throat, not human. Claws extended from his fingertips, black, curved, deadly. He caught the creature by the throat, slamming it against the wall with bone-crunching force. Maury poured in. Ivy pressed her back to the wall, knife raised. The air filled with snarls, the wet rip of flesh, the copper tang of blood. Ronan's form blurred, muscles shifting, eyes blazing brighter. He fought like a storm given form, savage, precise, unstoppable. But he was still wounded. Silver venom slowed him. A claw raked his side, reopening old gashes. He staggered. Ivy didn't think. She lunged, knife sinking into the flank of a beast that had leaped for Ronan's blind side. It yelped, twisting toward her with bared fangs. Ronan's hand shot out, yanking her behind him. His arm wrapped around her waist, possessive, protective, pulling her flush against his back. Heat radiated from him again, that strange power surging where their bodies touched. "Touch me," he growled over his shoulder. "Skin to skin, the bond will heal us both." Her hand found his side, bare, blood-slick muscle. The contact ignited something deeper. Pain faded from her shoulder, strength flooded her limbs. Ronan's wounds began to knit before her eyes, slowly but visibly. He roared, a sound that shook the cellar walls, and the remaining beasts faltered. One last leap, Ronan met it head-on, claws tearing through fur and bone. The creature dropped, lifeless. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. Ronan turned to her, chest heaving, eyes still glowing but calmer now. Blood streaked his face, but he looked, alive, whole. He reached out, slowly this time, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek with surprising gentleness. His thumb lingered, tracing the line of her jaw. "The first touch," he said quietly, voice rough with something new, wonder, hunger. "It binds us deeper than any chain." Ivy met his gaze. Fear still simmered, but beneath it burned something fiercer. Curiosity, defiance, desire. Outside, the howls retreated, distant now, defeated for the moment. But the night was far from over, and neither was the debt. What happens next? The hunters will return stronger, with silver weapons forged for a Kingslayer. The bond between Ivy and Ronan grows, pulling them toward a fate neither expected, mates marked by silver and blood. The cellar reeked of blood and scorched silver. Bodies, half man, half wolf, lay twisted in the dirt, their glowing eyes dulled to lifeless glass. Ronan stood over the last one, chest heaving, claws slowly retracting into bloodied fingertips. His wounds had closed to angry red lines, but fresh gashes wept dark blood down his ribs. The bond thrummed between them like a second heartbeat. Every time Ivy exhaled, she felt the echo in his chest. He turned to her, golden eyes still luminous in the dying candlelight, but softer now. Less predator, more man. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion carved into his features, the hollows under his cheekbones, the faint tremor in his hands. "We cannot stay," he said, voice low and urgent. "They will return with more, with weapons forged to kill kings." Ivy nodded, adrenaline still singing in her veins. Her shoulder wound had scabbed over unnaturally fast, the skin around it warm and tingling where the bond pulsed. She didn't question it, not yet. Survival didn't allow the luxury of doubt. Ronan ripped the last of the silver chains from the wall, wincing as the metal smoked against his palm one final time before he hurled it into the corner. The runes flickered out like dying embers. He moved with predatory grace despite the pain, snatching a heavy fur cloak from a hook and draping it over her shoulders without asking. "Cover your scent," he murmured, pulling the hood up to shadow her face. His fingers brushed her cheek again, deliberate this time. The contact sent another jolt through her, warmth, strength, a whisper of something ancient and possessive that made her breath hitch. She met his gaze. "Where do we go?" "Deep into the heart of the forest. There is a place my kind once called Sanctuary, a grove where no silver can hold power. If we reach it before dawn, the bond can shield us both." He didn't wait for agreement. Instead, he scooped her up in one fluid motion, arm under her knees, the other cradling her back against his chest. Ivy stiffened, protest rising to her lips, but the heat of him, the steady thunder of his heart against her ear, silenced it. He was wounded, yet he carried her as if she weighed nothing. "Save your strength," he growled softly. "The hunters are fast, and you are bleeding again." She hadn't noticed. The bandage had soaked through anew. She pressed her palm to the wound, feeling the strange warmth of the bond knitting flesh she shouldn't be able to heal. Ronan climbed the ladder in 3 powerful strides, pausing only to kick aside a fallen beast. The main room was destroyed, doors splintered, shelves overturned, moonlight spilling through the broken roof like spilled mercury. Outside, the night was unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, only the distant, watchful silence of a forest holding its breath. He stepped into the clearing. Ivy felt the shift in him immediately, spine straightening, nostrils flaring. His eyes scanned the tree line, pupils narrowing to slits. "Hold on," he said. Then he ran. The world blurred. Trees whipped past in streaks of black and silver. Ronan's strides devoured the ground, long, impossibly fast, yet impossibly smooth. Ivy clung to his shoulders, fingers digging into muscle that flexed and bunched beneath her grip. Wind tore at the cloak, but his body shielded her from the worst of it. Every leap sent a fresh pulse through the bond. His pain, her fear, their shared determination weaving together into something unbreakable. They ran for what felt like hours. The terrain grew steeper, wilder, roots like gnarled fingers, moss-slick boulders, streams that glowed faintly under the sliver of moon that dared to pierce the canopy. Ronan never slowed. If anything, he grew faster, stronger, as if her touch fed him. At last, he vaulted a fallen giant cedar and skidded to a halt in a small hollow ringed by ancient standing stones. Moss-covered monoliths loomed like silent sentinels, carved with the same wolf and thorn motifs she'd seen in the cabin. In the center stood a single massive oak, its trunk wide enough for 10 men to encircle, branches spreading like a cathedral roof. No leaves clung to it despite the season, only bare, black limbs reaching for the sky. Ronan set her down gently. His breathing was ragged, sweat gleaming on his skin. "The grove," he said. "No hunter can enter without invitation. The old magic still lingers here." Ivy steadied herself against a stone, The air felt different, thicker, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. She looked up at him. Moonlight painted silver streaks across his chest, highlighting every scar, every fresh wound. "You're still bleeding," she said quietly. "So are you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him in waves. "The bond is not complete, not yet." Her pulse jumped. "What does that mean?" He lifted a hand, slow, careful, and brushed his knuckles along her jaw. The touch ignited sparks behind her eyes. "It means we share strength, pain, life, but to seal it, we must give more." His voice dropped to a rough whisper, blood, breath, skin. Ivy's mouth went dry. She should step back. She should demand answers, demand proof this wasn't some enchantment meant to ensnare her. Instead, she reached up, hesitant at first, placing her palm flat against the center of his chest. His heart slammed against her hand, fierce and wild. Beneath her fingers, the worst of his gashes had already begun to knit. Ronan's eyes darkened. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his skin. "Ivy," he breathed, her name sounding like a vow and a curse in the same breath. The bond surged, hot, demanding, electric. Images flashed again, her standing beside him under a blood moon, wolves bowing at their feet, silver chains shattering like glass, a crown of thorns and antlers resting on both their heads. She gasped, "I saw." "I know." His free hand slid to the nape of her neck, thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. "The future, one path. There are others, darker ones, if we do not finish what the silver began." Another distant howl, fainter now, but still hunting. Ivy looked into his eyes. No deception there, only hunger, need, and a fierce, reluctant tenderness. She rose on her toes. Their lips met, tentative at first, then fierce. The bond roared to life. Power crashed through them both, wounds sealed, strength flooded limbs. The grove seemed to hum in approval, the standing stones glowing faintly blue. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "Mine," he growled softly, the word vibrating against her lips. Ivy smiled, small, dangerous, alive. "And you are mine." The howls came again, closer. But this time, they weren't afraid. They were ready. The night belonged to them now. The grove pulsed with quiet power, the standing stones glowing a soft, ethereal blue that painted Ronan's skin in shifting patterns of shadow and light. The howls of the hunters had faded to distant echoes, circling but not yet daring to breach the ancient wards. Dawn was still hours away, but the sliver of moon that pierced the canopy had grown brighter, almost expectant. Ivy stood beneath the great oak, the fur cloak slipping from one shoulder, exposing the blood-crusted bandage and the pale curve of her neck. Ronan watched her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare, not just of clothing, but of every defense she had ever built. "The bond is awake," he said, voice rough as river stones, "but it is not sealed, not yet." She lifted her chin, refusing to look away from those molten gold eyes. "Then tell me what it requires. No more half-truths, no more riddles." Ronan stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until the heat of his body brushed hers. He reached out, fingertips grazing the edge of her torn sleeve where the arrow had struck. The fabric parted easily under his touch, revealing the wound that had already begun to scar, too fast, too clean. His thumb traced the raised pink line, reverent. "Blood calls to blood," he murmured. "The first touch woke it, the kiss fed it, but to make us one, to make you my mate in truth, unbreakable, the bond demands everything." Ivy's breath caught, "Everything." He nodded once, "Your blood on my tongue, mine on yours, skin against skin until there is no separation. The moon must witness it." His gaze flicked upward to the narrow strip of sky visible through the branches. "Tonight, she is close enough." A shiver ran through her, not fear, not entirely. Something deeper, hungrier, uncoiled in her belly. The bond thrummed in response, sending warm pulses through her veins, pooling low in her core. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though her voice had gone husky. Ronan's hand slid up her arm, cupping the back of her neck. His thumb stroked the sensitive spot beneath her ear. Then the bond remains half-formed. We are stronger together than apart, but the hunters will sense the weakness. They will tear at it until one of us breaks. His eyes darkened, or both. Ivy searched his face. No coercion there, only raw honesty and a need so fierce it bordered on pain. She had fled England to escape being owned, controlled, burned. Yet here, in this sacred grove with a creature who was both man and wolf, she felt no chains. Only choice. She lifted her hands to the torn remnants of his shirt and pushed the fabric aside, baring the broad plane of his chest. Scars crisscrossed his skin, old and new, but the worst of the silver venom had faded to faint silver lines, like lightning frozen beneath flesh. "Then let the moon witness," she said. Ronan's growl was low, approving, almost reverent. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the base of the great oak, where the roots formed a natural cradle of moss and earth. He laid her down gently, the fur cloak spreading beneath her like a dark wing. He knelt between her legs, hands braced on either side of her head. For a long moment, he simply looked, memorizing her face, her throat, the rapid flutter of her pulse. "You are mine to protect," he said, voice thick, "mine to cherish, mine to claim." Ivy reached up, fingers threading through his dark hair, "And you are mine." That was the spark. Ronan's mouth crashed down on hers, fierce, claiming no gentleness left. She met him with equal hunger, teeth clashing, tongues tangling. The bond roared to life, a wildfire racing through them both. He tore the rest of her bodice open with careful claws, never breaking skin, only fabric. Cool night air kissed her bare breasts, then his mouth followed, hot and wet, drawing a gasp from her throat. His tongue circled one peak, then sucked hard, pulling a moan from deep in her chest. Ivy arched, nails digging into his shoulders. The bond amplified every sensation, his pleasure echoing in her, hers feeding back to him in a dizzying loop. When his hand slid between her thighs, finding her already slick and aching, she cried out, "Ronan!" He lifted his head, eyes blazing. "Say it again." "Ronan," she pulled him down, kissing him hard as his fingers circled, teased, then plunged inside her. She bucked against his hand, the bond turning every stroke into lightning. He withdrew only long enough to shed what remained of his torn breeches. His length sprang free, thick, hard, already weeping at the tip. Ivy's mouth watered at the sight. She reached for him, wrapping her fingers around his shaft. He hissed, hips jerking into her grip. "Careful, little mate, I am not gentle tonight." "Good," she breathed. "I don't want gentle." With a snarl, he positioned himself at her entrance. One slow, relentless push, and he was inside her. They both froze, gasping. The bond detonated. Power surged wild, ancient, unstoppable. Ivy felt him everywhere, in her blood, her bones, her soul. She saw flashes again, the pack bowing, the crown of thorns and antlers settling on both their heads, wolves running under a blood moon with 2 alphas at the lead. She felt his memories, betrayal by his brother, the silver chains, centuries of loneliness. And he felt hers, the witchfinder's torches, her mother's screams, the long voyage across a storm-tossed sea. Then it all narrowed to this, him inside her, moving now deep, powerful thrusts that rocked her against the moss. She wrapped her legs around his waist, heels digging into his back, urging him harder, faster. "Maury," she demanded. He gave it to her, each stroke driving them both toward the edge. His mouth found her throat, fangs grazing the skin where her pulse hammered. "I need to mark you," he growled against her flesh. "Need to taste you." "Do it." His teeth sank in sharp, perfect pain that bloomed into blinding pleasure. She screamed his name as the orgasm ripped through her, clenching around him like a fist. Ronan roared against her skin, hips slamming once, twice. Then he buried himself deep and came with a shudder that shook them both. The bond sealed. Light flared, blue-white, blinding from the standing stones. The grove trembled. Ivy felt the final piece snap into place, his life tied to hers, hers to his, no separation, no weakness, only unity. When the light faded, Ronan licked the bite mark gently, sealing it with his tongue. It would scar 2 perfect crescent moons on her throat, visible to any who knew what to look for. He collapsed beside her, pulling her against his chest. Their breathing synced, hearts beating as one. "They will come again," he murmured into her hair. "But now we are whole, now we fight as mates." Ivy turned in his arms, pressing a kiss to the corner of his mouth. "Let them come." Above them, the moon slipped behind a cloud, but the grove still glowed faintly, as if the night itself acknowledged the new queen. The hunters would find more than a wounded king tonight. They would find a mated pair, unbreakable, unstoppable, and very, very angry. The grove's blue glow faded slowly, like embers dying in the hearth. Ivy lay curled against Ronan's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heart, now perfectly synced with her own. The mating bite on her throat throbbed gently, a reminder of the seal that bound them. She felt him in every breath, his strength flowing into her, her courage feeding back to him. Wounds that should have left her weak were already forgotten scars. Ronan's fingers traced lazy circles on her bare back. "They will come before first light," he said quietly. "My brother leads them now. He has waited centuries for this moment to end the line and claim the crown." Ivy lifted her head. "Your brother." Elias, the name came out like a curse. "He was my beater once, loyal, until ambition poisoned him. He forged the silver chains with help from a dark shaman who hated our kind. He thought to kill me quietly, let the venom do the work. Instead, I survived barely, and the pack split. Half followed him, the other half waited. For you." "For us," his golden eyes met hers. They sensed the bond complete. They will rally tonight. A low growl rumbled from the tree line, different from before. Not the frenzied snarls of the first attackers, but something disciplined, organized. Ronan sat up, pulling her with him. "They're here." Ivy rose to her feet, naked except for the fur cloak draped loosely around her shoulders. She should have felt vulnerable. Instead, power hummed beneath her skin, strange, wild, awakening. The bond had changed her. She felt sharper, stronger, as if the forest itself whispered secrets in her blood. Ronan stepped in front of her, body shifting subtly, muscles thickening, bones lengthening just enough to hint at the beast beneath. "Stay close. When I shift, do not fear. The bond will let you feel what I feel. Fight with me." She nodded, heart pounding with anticipation rather than terror. The first hunter stepped into the clearing, tall, silver-haired, eyes the same molten gold as Ronan's, but colder, crueler. He wore a cloak of black wolf pelts and carried a long blade etched with the same runes that had burned Ronan's skin. "Brother," Elias called, voice smooth as oil, "you look recovered, and you've taken a mate, how touching." Behind him, a dozen others emerged, half in human form, half already shifted, fur bristling, eyes glowing red. They fanned out, blocking every path from the grove. Ronan bared his teeth. "You should have finished me when you had the chance, Elias." "I wanted you to suffer." Elias' gaze slid to Ivy. "And now I see why. A mortal woman, weak, breakable, she will be your downfall." Ivy felt Ronan's rage spike through the bond, hot, protective, lethal, but she placed a hand on his arm. "He wants to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction." Elias laughed. "Listen to your little human, how quaint." Ronan's body began to change in earnest. Bones cracked and reshaped. Fur black as midnight rippled across his skin. His spine arched, shoulders broadening impossibly wide. Claws lengthened into black scythes. Within seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a massive black wolf, larger than any natural beast, eyes blazing gold, fangs gleaming. The bond flared. Ivy gasped as she felt the shift inside her own body, heightened senses, strength surging through her limbs, a wild urge to run, to hunt, to protect. Elias raised his blade. "Kill them both. Take the woman alive if you can. She'll make a fine trophy." The pack charged. Ronan met them like a storm. He leaped into the fray, jaws closing around the throat of the nearest shifter. Blood sprayed. A snarl tore from his throat, deep, earth-shaking. Ivy felt every bite, every tear of flesh as if it were her own. Pain and triumph mingled in the bond. She didn't stand idle. A hunter lunged for her, human form, dagger raised. Ivy moved without thinking. Her hand shot out, catching his wrist. Strength she shouldn't have possessed snapped the bone like dry wood. The dagger fell. She drove her knee into his gut, then slammed her palm into his throat. He dropped, choking. Another came, shifted, claws extended. Ivy ducked under the swipe, grabbed a fallen branch thick as her arm and swung. Wood cracked against skull. The beast staggered. Through the bond, she felt Ronan's approval, fierce pride, raw desire. Elias circled the fight, blade gleaming. "You think a mortal can stand with a king?" he sneered at Ivy. She met his gaze. "I'm no longer just mortal." The bond pulsed. Something inside her answered, something ancient, awakened by Ronan's blood and bite. Her nails lengthened slightly, not full claws, but sharp enough to draw blood. Her senses sharpened until she could hear the hunter's heartbeats, smell their fear. Elias lunged at her, blade arcing for her throat. Ronan was there in an instant, massive black form slamming into his brother, knocking the blade aside. They rolled, snarling, claws raking. Elias shifted mid-fall, silver-grey wolf, lean and vicious. The two alphas clashed, teeth and claws, fury and betrayal. Ivy felt every blow Ronan took, every wound he inflicted. The bond screamed with shared pain, shared rage. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fallen silver blade, its runes flaring painfully against her skin, but she ignored it. She drove it into the flank of a shifter trying to flank Ronan. The beast howled as silver venom burned through its veins. Ronan seized the opening. His jaws closed around Elias' throat. One brutal shake, and it was over. Elias' body dropped, lifeless. The remaining hunters froze. Ronan lifted his head, blood dripping from his muzzle, and roared, a sound that shook the standing stones and made the forest itself answer. The hunters broke. They fled into the darkness, tails low, whimpers trailing behind them. Silence fell. Ronan shifted back, human again, chest heaving, covered in blood but whole. He turned to Ivy, eyes wide with awe. "You fought," he said hoarsely. "You bled with me." She stepped into his arms, the silver blade dropping from her fingers. "We are mated. Of course I fought." He crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair. "My queen," he whispered, "my mate, my equal." Above them, the moon broke through the clouds, full now, impossibly bright, bathing the grove in silver light. The pack that had waited in the shadows emerged, wolves with lowered heads, eyes glowing gold in respect. They circled the grove, then one by one shifted to human form, men and women, scarred and strong, bowing to their returned king and to the woman at his side. Ivy looked up at Ronan. "What now?" He smiled, slow, dangerous, full of promise. "Now we rebuild, now we rule together." The bond sang between them, complete, unbreakable, eternal. And the forest, for the first time in centuries, felt at peace. Winter had come to the Olympic Peninsula like a slow, deliberate siege. Snow fell in heavy, silent curtains, blanketing the ancient cedars until their branches bowed under the weight. The forest, once a place of ambush and blood, now breathed differently, calmer, watchful, almost reverent. The grove where Ivy and Ronan had sealed their mating bond stood at the heart of it all, the standing stones half buried in drifts, their surfaces etched with frost that caught the moonlight and threw it back in pale blue shards. Months had passed since Elias' body had cooled on the snow, months of hard, necessary work. The scattered remnants of the shadowed packs had trickled in one by one, wary at first, then hopeful, then fiercely loyal. Some came alone, carrying nothing but their shame and their scars. Others arrived in small family groups, children clinging to parents' legs. Eyes wide at the sight of the black-furred alpha who had once been a ghost story. Ronan welcomed them all, but he never lowered his guard entirely. Trust, he had told Ivy in the quiet hours after lovemaking, was earned in blood and time. Ivy had learned that lesson too. She no longer moved like a fugitive. Her steps were sure, her gaze direct. The mating bite on the side of her throat had healed to two elegant silver crescents that shimmered faintly when she was angry or aroused or simply standing beneath the moon. The pack called them her queen marks. She had laughed the first time she heard the term, laughing until she saw the reverence in their eyes. They weren't mocking her, they were honoring her. Tonight the pack gathered in the great clearing before the new den. The structure itself was a marvel, not a crude cabin, but a sprawling lodge woven from living trees and fallen giants, its walls reinforced with river stone and chinked with fragrant cedar resin. Massive beams arched overhead like the ribs of some benevolent beast. Inside burned a central hearth so large it could take entire logs. Smoke rose through a high vent, carved to resemble a howling wolf silhouette against the sky. Around the edges of the clearing, smaller dens and shelters had sprung up, some dug into hillsides, others built into the trunks of ancient trees. Lanterns of oiled parchment and whale oil hung from branches, their warm golden light pushing back the winter dark. Tonight was the night of the crowning. Ronan had refused to wear the crown of thorns alone. Ivy stood at the edge of the clearing now, wrapped in the heavy white wolf pelt he had hunted and cured for her. Beneath it she wore a simple dress of deep forest green wool, woven by the pack's elders from threads dyed with moss, nettle, and wild indigo. Around her neck hung a single silver chain, not the burning links that had once bound Ronan, but a new one forged by the pack's smith from melted remnants of the old chains. It rested cool against her skin, a deliberate reminder. What was once a curse had become a symbol of choice. The pack had already formed a wide circle. Dozens of them, men, women, adolescents, even the youngest children perched on shoulders. Their breath steamed in the cold air. Eyes glowed softly in the lantern light. Gold, amber, green, silver-gray, they waited in silence. Ronan appeared from the lodge doorway. He wore only black leather breeches and boots, torso bare despite the snowflakes melting on his skin. Every scar told a story, claw marks from Elia's, silver burns that had faded to pale lightning streaks, the fresh bite-mark scars Ivy had left on his shoulder the night they first shifted together. His dark hair was bound back with a leather thong, his eyes burned brighter than the torches. He carried the crown of thorns in both hands. It was heavier than it looked, black ironwood thorns twisted into a circlet, interwoven with polished elk antlers and thin strands of silver wire. No jewels, no gold, only the raw materials of pain, survival, and wild power. He walked straight to Ivy. The pack parted for him like water. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee in the snow, something no alpha had done in living memory. A ripple of murmurs spread through the circle, then silence again. "Ivy Hawthorne," he began, voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing, "you crossed an ocean to escape a world that wanted to burn you for your knowledge, your courage, your refusal to kneel. You came to this land seeking only solitude. Instead you found chains mine, and you broke them, not with force alone but with choice, with blood, with trust." He lifted his eyes to hers. "You fought beside me when you could have run, you bled when you could have hidden, you loved when it would have been safer to hate. You are not merely my mate. You are the reason the shadowed packs still breathe. You are the reason the forest no longer weeps in silence." Snowflakes caught in his lashes, he did not blink. "The crown of thorns has always belonged to the one strong enough to wear it without breaking. Tonight, I ask you to wear it with me, not behind me, not beneath me, but beside me, as my equal, as my queen, as the heart of this pack." He raised the crown. The pack held its breath. Ivy looked down at him, at the man who had once been chained in darkness, who had carried her through moonless forests, who had whispered her name like a prayer when he first sank his teeth into her throat. She remembered the terror of that cellar, the fire of their first joining, the savage joy of battle. She remembered nights spent tangled in furs while snow howled outside, mornings when she woke to find him watching her with such unguarded tenderness it stole her breath. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the thorns. They were sharp, sharp enough to draw blood if she gripped too hard. She did not flinch. Instead, she lifted the crown from his hands, feeling its weight settle into her palms like destiny. "I accept," she said, voice clear and strong, "not because I crave power, but because I refuse to let fear rule me ever again. Because I love you, Ronan, king, wolf, man, monster, mate. Because this pack deserves leaders who remember what it is to bleed, and because I am done running." She placed the crown on her own head. The thorns settled against her dark hair like they had grown there. A single bead of blood welled on her fingertip where a thorn had pricked her. She let it fall onto the snow, red against white, a promise. The pack exploded. Howls rose, deep, joyous, layered, rolling outward through the trees until the entire forest answered. Wolves shifted in a ripple of light and shadow. Humans lifted children onto shoulders. Elders struck drums made of stretched elk hide. The sound was thunder and joy and release all at once. Ronan rose. He took her face between his hands, gentle despite the calluses and scars, and kissed her. Not a chaste, ceremonial kiss. A claiming, a celebration, a vow renewed. When they parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "My queen," he whispered. "My king," she answered. The pack surged forward then, careful not to crowd, but eager to offer respect. One by one they approached, touching foreheads to hers, pressing palms to her hands, murmuring thanks and oaths of loyalty. Children stared at her crown with wide eyes. Elders nodded with the satisfaction of those who had waited lifetimes to see balance restored. Later, when the fires burned lower and most had retreated to warmth and sleep, Ivy and Ronan walked alone to the great oak at the center of the grove. Snow had collected in the crooks of its bare branches. Moonlight turned it silver. Ronan pulled her against his chest, arms encircling her from behind. His chin rested on her shoulder, his breath warmed her ear. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly, "the world you left?" Ivy tilted her head back against him. "I miss books," she admitted, "and tea that isn't brewed from pine needles and glass windows, but I do not miss fear, I do not miss being small." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I have more here than I ever had there. I have purpose, I have you, I have a pack that looks at me not as a curiosity or a threat, but as theirs." Ronan's thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. "And soon," he said, voice dropping to a rumble, "you will have more." She stilled. "What do you mean?" He placed a hand low on her belly, gentle, reverent. "The bond sings differently now, I feel it. A second heartbeat, small, strong." Ivy's breath caught. She covered his hand with hers. A tiny flutter answered, too faint for human senses, but the bond carried it clearly. Tears strung her eyes, not sadness, but wonder so sharp it hurt. "A child," she whispered. "Our child," he corrected, voice thick. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, filled with a tenderness that contrasted the ferocity they had shown each other in battle and in bed. When they drew apart, snowflakes had caught in both their hair. Ivy smiled, small, fierce, radiant. "Then we build more than a pack," she said. "We build a legacy." Ronan lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. "Together," he vowed. He carried her back toward the lodge, past the glowing windows and sleeping dens, past the standing stones that had witnessed their beginning. The forest watched. The moon watched. And somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf lifted its voice in a long, triumphant howl. The shadowed packs had come home. The queen wore thorns, and the future was already growing beneath her heart. The